Welcome to another episode of Rise and Thrive Women, journeying from surviving to thriving after abuse. We're your hosts, Susie and Heather, and we're so honored you're here. If you've experienced the heartache of toxic relationships, you know the feeling of being lost, broken, and unsure of where to turn next. And this podcast is for you.
We're here to inspire, educate, and empower women like you, no matter where you are on your healing journey. Together, we'll challenge the misconceptions surrounding domestic abuse, explore practical solutions, and listen to incredible survivor stories that remind us all that there is a brighter, better future waiting for you. It is time to rise, thrive, and choose yourself. Let's begin this healing journey together.
Yay. How are you doing, Heather?
I am fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing good. Doing good. I'm excited to dive into this topic today. You and I had talked about it a couple weeks ago and each had the assignment of watching the Netflix documentary that was recently released. And obviously this case didn't happen that long ago. It was back in 2021 that this whole incident happened. But I think some new life was sparked into Gabby's story and into the topic of abuse in relationships and what it can lead to with the release of this documentary. So I'm thankful that it was released so it can be a topic and more information out there. So
it's a heavy story. I mean, I watched it over the weekend and it's still on my mind. So it's one of those things that she's just too young. Sorry.
Yeah.
She was just so young and full of life. And it's just so often that these stories, I don't think that we have enough documentaries, if I'm being honest, but if you know people who are impacted and have that drastic outcome that no one wants to face, it's always the same, if the victim is a female, or male, they're always full of life. They are full of love and they just want to help their partner. And they don't see it as abuse, right? Like they don't identify themselves as abuse victims. So
Right. And that's why we wanted to spend some time talking about it today. And we'll talk about Gabby's story specifically and some things that we observed in the documentary that we feel like everybody can learn from. But we wanted to talk about it because it is so relevant, and not just because of how her story ended, but because her story, like you said, it mirrors what so many survivors go through in these relationships with narcissistic people. So the point of this episode that we're doing today is really to help people recognize those subtle signs of abuse that narcissists often use. And help empower you, those of you who are listening, who this resonates with, to trust your instincts and reclaim your life. Or if you're listening to this and you know someone who is in a relationship like this, to help you, give you that validation if you're seeing things that just don't seem right or feel right, and some things that you can do, to help support people in this situation. Because covert, we're going to be talking specifically about covert abuse, which is a very hidden and a subtle manipulation that's harder to spot than the more overt, obvious types of abuse, but it's just as damaging. So again, we're going to give you some education around that and how to identify that. Because like you said, many people who are in these relationships are, they're just questioning whether or not what they're experiencing counts as abuse, because oftentimes there's no physical signs. There were in Gabby's case, but oftentimes that happens towards the end when things really escalate, and a lot of emotional abuse has led up to that. So that's what we're talking about today. And we encourage you out there who are listening, if you have just thoughts about her case or questions, like please ask or comment as we go. We answer questions at the end, but feel free to just drop those in whenever you feel like it. So
sorry, Susie.
No, go ahead. I
was just going to say, if you have watched the documentary and you want to add to the conversation on things that you've picked up or things that stood out to you in the interviews, please also, feel free to share those thoughts as well.
For sure. Yes, we welcome that. So maybe we just start first by just talking about a little bit more about what covert abuse is. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Heather?
Yeah, sure. So covert abuse, we have overt and covert. And if you know, I guess I'll say, if you don't know these sort of abuse terms, overt is your form of out loud abuse, right? They're your yellers, your verbal abusers, your physical assaulters. They're very overt and out loud and dominant with their abuse tactics.
Mm-hmm.
Covert is the exact opposite. It's undercover, right? It's behind closed doors, and it's hidden. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's very subtle, and it's often very psychological and emotional. And the folks on the outside of your relationship don't typically pick up on it.
Right.
Um, I
Yeah.
mean,
I think a lot of people who come out of these relationships, they say oftentimes no one else knew what was going on behind closed doors.
yep,
Everybody thought he was so amazing, so wonderful, because they portray I think the covert abuser is especially good at portraying themselves as highly charismatic,
yeah,
successful, nice, a good guy. They're just very highly skilled at that, which makes it even more confusing for the victim because they're getting two versions of this person, one
yeah,
outside and then the one that they actually live with behind closed doors. So,
yeah.
yeah, it's a good
I
point.
will say, when I was watching the document, in terms of, looking at covert tactics and comparing that to the documentary, I found it very interesting hearing in the very beginning when they were interviewing Gabby's mom and stepdad and her dad and stepmom. It was really interesting to hear, oh, and her friend. It was interesting to hear their first thoughts of Brian. Um,
Hmm.
for her mother, she didn't say anything bad. She just said he was very quiet. He seemed a little socially awkward, but he was more so quiet, but he was very respectful. And her dad seemed to really like him. And her stepmom even said, I really liked him. Her father said, he shook my hand, he made eye contact, in those.
Yeah.
And then the best friend was saying, she said something, she mentioned having a conversation with her mom because they were younger, right? So they still have a whole lot of their parents in their lives. And so
Right.
when she was talking about the conversation she had with her mother, she was like, how did it go meeting, Gabby's boyfriend? And her response was, he's nice, he's really nice, but there's something off about him.
Yeah, I remember that first meeting. I think they went to the beach, the three of them, and he was
Yep.
just kind of like off to the side doing his thing. But yeah, not outwardly being rude or disrespectful in any way, but just something about the interaction struck
Yeah.
her as odd.
She
So,
said, I mean, I remember, I don't know, I remember so much of what the friend said because it's just textbook. For as I was listening to her,
totally.
it's like it's textbook. But
Mhm.
she said he was off kind of doing his own thing and they were having fun together, and it was almost like having a dad watch them on a play date. That was her description of
Mhm.
the interaction.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I was just like, well, that screams covert abuse
Right,
because
right,
he's got
for
to be
sure.
there. He's got to witness it. He
Kind
has
of
to
supervising in a
supervise.
way,
Yep.
which ended up long term, which we'll get into, as him isolating her. So definitely like an early sign of that coming.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
just
So
a quick
yeah,
few
what are some
examples.
tactics
We
that
have gaslighting, which is when someone makes you question your perception of reality. When they say things like you're too sensitive, or that never happened, or it didn't happen like that. where typically gaslighting happens whenever you voice some sort of concern, and they try to retrace the steps of what happened and make you think that you either blew it out of proportion or it didn't happen the way you're saying it happened. And they try to reframe your mindset and your memory. So it kind of distorts your reality of what really happened.
Right.
And then you have the silent treatment. So withholding communication to punish you and make you feel invisible. So like if you do something that they don't really like, they will ignore you. They will withhold affection. They won't talk to you. If like dinner is a thing, like they won't offer you dinner or cook you dinner. I've heard people say that like dinner was like a big silent treatment punishment, where if they typically cooked, they just wouldn't cook, or they'd go out to eat and not ask them if they wanted anything to eat and just pretend like they didn't exist.
Right. Yeah. It's such a control tactic.
Yep. Subtle criticism. So disguising insults as jokes. Oh my gosh. That one gets under my skin more than anything. Personal trauma.
Right.
Or helpful advice, like you'd be better if you smiled more. Oh,
And we saw a lot of this in this Gabby Petito case, and just in how she openly expressed that he would tell her she would never make it as a blogger or a vlogger, and how I think she thought she could do it, but he repeatedly told her, "You're never going to be able to be successful."
Or made her feel silly for it, like
yeah,
she's
for sure,
too.
Right.
Well, they were together for some time, but she's in her early 20s. It was also interesting to see you could tell he was ingenuine on camera, right? Like, and even watching the transition of just her before she was doing the vlog, and she was just, being a 20-something-year-old, recording her and her boyfriend having, being loving and just doing silly recordings that kids do.
Right.
You could even see her demeanor change, because it looked like she was very comfortable and was like very loving. And he was like, you could see the genuine uncomfortable feeling in his face when she was recording. And then even later on in the show, you could see that her confidence was gone. It was almost like she started out recording things all fun and, full of life on screen. And then when they were on the road and she was isolated, you could see her questioning herself. Like, I don't know, like, how should I position myself? It was almost like that part of her had died, essentially.
For sure. Yeah, totally. I just had a thought pop in my head, and I lost it. Darn.
Well,
I was going to say, when you were talking about his demeanor on these videos, I actually watched this documentary with my teenagers. I have a son and a daughter, and they had expressed interest in watching it because they watch Netflix. They saw it pop up as one I recommended. And so I gave it some thought, and I ended up agreeing to watch it with them. And they said his smile is so phony in those videos that she's making. And it's interesting you call that out, but we noticed the same thing.
Well, it also kind of it plays into the textbook love bombing phase, when he seems genuinely interested in doing this with her, right? But it's almost like he's doing it and playing along because that's what she wants to do. And then once he got her where he wanted her and was comfortable, that's when he was telling her, well, I assume that's whenever he said it was stupid or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And then playing victim was a big one. I didn't want to leave that off, Susie, because you can see they share a lot of text exchanges between the two of them. And no one else saw these messages, right? This is like an after the fact, you get to see these text messages. But again, textbook psychological, emotional abuse, and he is constantly playing victim when you look at the text exchanges between the two of them when they have a conflict.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. Those are all really good examples of what covert abuse can look like. It's not a comprehensive list by any means, but I think some of the big ones that happen in these types of relationships. Hey, Michael, thanks for the comment. Michael says the Petito documentary is really good at shedding light on this covert narcissist stuff. Yes, we agree. That's why we thought it was important to talk about it. So thanks for watching and thanks for being here. So let's just talk a little bit about the Gabby Petito's story specifically. So if you haven't heard about the story at a really high level, so Gabby was a young woman, age 22, who was traveling across the country with her fiance, Brian Laundrie, and her life was tragically taken by him after experiencing what many believe was a pattern of emotional and psychological abuse turned physical abuse. So that's a little snippet of the story, but we do encourage you to watch it. It can be triggering though, so trigger warning on that. If you've experienced abuse, it can definitely bring up some emotions. So some key moments we just wanted to highlight. First of all, the body cam footage that's shown in the police body cam footage. So their van was pulled over because he was driving erratically after someone had witnessed him slapping her, right? And in town, wherever they were at the time, someone had seen him slapping her and then described the van, and the police were able to find them, and he was driving erratically. So they pulled him over, and this body cam footage, you see Gabby visibly upset, but immediately she is taking the blame for what happened. She's apologizing for the situation and really kind of downplaying what happened. So just really classic signs of someone who's being manipulated into believing that the abuse is their fault. She apologized for being mean. She was saying how anxious she was and that she had been locked out of the van because her OCD symptoms had really been flaring up and he wanted her to just calm down. So he had locked her out of the van, which is another huge red flag. And meanwhile, they put her in the police vehicle and they take Brian aside, and his demeanor is strikingly different. He's calm, he's composed, very cool. And this is also very classic, narcissist behavior. They, again, like we talked about at the beginning, they can come across very rational, very charming. And meanwhile, their victim is hysterical, and they can point to that and say, look, she's the problem here. She's the crazy one or the bad one or whatever, the source of the problem. So it does make it difficult for outsiders to really understand what's happening. Although I do think the police should have acted much differently. And we can talk about that a little bit, but that's kind of my takeaway from the body cam footage. But any other thoughts from you, Heather, on that? Things we can learn from it?
No, we're going to talk about the police stuff later, right? Because I have thoughts on that entire interaction and advice for anyone who may find themselves in that situation. But
we can talk about it now too, if you want. It doesn't matter. I don't remember if we'd specifically talked about it, but
there was just very specific. There was one of the officers. It's almost as if they knew that she was a victim, but because she was because she was admitting to being the aggressor and was so embarrassed that, that the cops were there and that, that they had been pulled over, and it was probably her that made him, like, she did something that made him hit the curb or something. And she was saying that she was the aggressor. It's almost as if the police officers knew that that's not what was happening, but the law is the law, and they have to take down statements. And based on those statements, that evidence supports her being the abuser and him being the victim. When it's clear she had a mark on her eye, she had scratches on her arm, and there was even a photo retrieved from her phone after they found her body. There was a picture of her with a black eye. On that day she was wearing the same clothes, so you can see what happened to her.
Right. And you had the account of the witness who saw him slapping her too. So I was left wondering, how extensively did they speak to that person and get their account of what they saw? Because,
Right.
Lori's version of the story was not that.
Right. Well, in the version, I don't know, like that was a random passerby who called and said, I saw this happen and couldn't watch it without calling and reporting it. I think it's a miracle that someone called and reported that, like just passing by, and the cops were able to find them. That is,
right.
I mean, I don't know what the odds of that, but I'd say pretty low. So he did. He said the guy was slapping the girl, and then they both got in the van and drove away. She was probably really afraid to tell the police the truth because of what he might do. But I think the point that I want to drive home here is when the cops were one-on-one by themselves, he said, this was on his body cam footage, when a woman is at risk for domestic violence, this is the reason that they don't give us very much discretion here, because I don't have a crystal ball and I can't predict what's going to happen. Is this going to be one of those cases where, in a day or so, I'm going to have to follow up on a report and I find her, I'm paraphrasing here, not exactly the exact wording here, but he was essentially saying, am I going to have to follow up on this case and find a dead body? Or is this just a one-off situation and, he's just going to slap her around for some time before she finally leaves? But that was essentially the conversation, is when women are at risk. He knew she was at risk. He said women. So he knew that she was at risk, but there was nothing he could do because, one, she was saying that she was the primary aggressor and they have to file that report. And so ultimately they separated him for the night, and he got the domestic violence hotel and she got the keys to the van by herself. So I think what they were trying to do is not ruin anyone's lives, but knowing that she was at risk in a domestic violence situation. But
I mean,
they asked her multiple times, even, well, what happened to your eye? She didn't respond. She was like, oh yeah, she was afraid to respond. So what I'm trying to say here, ladies and gentlemen, whomever finds themselves in this situation, if you're ever faced with having to speak to law enforcement over a domestic dispute, tell them what happened. Be brave and tell them exactly what happened, because you need it documented. You need this documented. Had she said exactly what happened and it lined up with what that 911 call said, it could have ended completely differently. I don't know how it would have ended, but I do know that if she would have spoken up and said, he hit me in the eye, I have a black eye here and I have scratches on my shoulder. If she would have said that, they may have arrested him and she could be alive right now.
Don't protect the abuser. Just
please.
That's such a good point. And I have been there, and I have also felt the need to protect the abuser. But this could be your chance. This could be your chance to escape. And this could be the chance you need to walk away with your life, so speak up. But it was interesting. I was researching a little bit about, what can law enforcement do in these situations? What's the guidance given to law enforcement? And I saw that I think Gabby Petito's family actually just recently filed a lawsuit against the Moab Police Department because they had committed to conducting or using this tool called a lethality assessment program. And I don't know how widely used this is, but it was developed by leading researchers in the field of domestic violence. And it's a series of questions that law enforcement officers can use to identify those who are at serious risk of experiencing a lethal assault at the hands of a partner. So they actually were supposed to use that program or be following that program, and they didn't. But the whole purpose of it is to, again, ask those questions, assess the level of risk, separate the victim from the abuser, and help disrupt that cycle of abuse, which, the victims are just trapped in. So it's unfortunate, obviously, that was not the case. But there is a pending lawsuit on that. So, okay, we've had some questions or some comments pop in here. Michael says police need to recognize reactive abuse. Absolutely. Yeah, it all comes back to just, education for these law enforcement officers. And Hillary, hi, Hillary. Thanks for joining us. Hillary says, Michael, it sounds like Narc's family often is very aware of their behaviors and enables the abuser. Mine did. Yes, that is so true. And this is such a glaring example of the enabler as well when we think about Brian's mom.
Yep.
Okay, so just getting back again to some of these key moments of the documentary that illustrate covert abuse. We talked a little bit about Brian playing victim when the police pulled them over. And there's actually an acronym for that, which I am kind of embarrassed to admit I hadn't heard of, being very active in this space, but it's called DARVO. And what that stands for is deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. So it's really just describing what happened here, where abusers will flip the script when they are called out. They'll deny what they did, they will attack your credibility, and they will make themselves the victim. So yeah, just that playing victim, poor me role, which Brian clearly played and made Gabby look like the aggressor. Some other key things that identify covert abuse here was the isolation from family and friends. We touched on that a little bit, but it was interesting. Heather, you and I talked about this offline a little bit, how after Gabby moved to Florida, it was her original idea to do this van life, right?
Yeah.
And she really put her head down and started working lots of hours at Taco Bell to save up the money to be able to do this. And I think Brian was kind of resistant at first, but after she started making connections with friends and connecting with people at work, it seemed like he then kind of sped up this process so that they could get on the road and she could be isolated out there, as they were traveling. She was definitely cut off from her support system. Anything you'd add on the isolation piece?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they met in Long Island, didn't they?
I think so.
I think it was Long Island. That's where they went to school. That's where they met. And it was very fast. I remember her mother saying, it was really fast whenever she said, because Gabby hadn't even come out and said that her and Brian were dating yet.
Right.
And then within a short period of time, she said, what do you think about me moving to Florida with Brian? And she just said it was really fast. So I think the first step of isolation was getting her away from her friends and family in Long Island and moving her all the way in Florida. Yeah, where they stayed with his family. And so it's almost as if, this was her home now. I say this was her home because I'm in Florida, but this was her home. And so she decided to make the best of it and go to work and start saving money. And she bought her van. And it's almost like as soon as she started making decent, well, he didn't think they were decent friends, but she was, 22 or 20, however young she was making friends, and she was, living her life in the way that you do when you're 20, and he didn't like it. So he very quickly, instead of calling the vlog stupid, it was no longer stupid. It was, let me get this van ready so I can get us on the road and get her away from these people that she, that's distracting her from being with me.
Right. Yeah. Because he was definitely guilt tripping her while she was at work about spending too much time there and neglecting him and all the things. So yeah, definitely a lot of isolation.
They share a lot of messages. If you haven't watched the documentary, they share a lot of messages of those interactions between Brian and Gabby as well. And it was around that time where you could see her telling him, you really hurt me when you say these things. She wasn't there where she wanted to leave yet, but you could definitely see that she was kind of starting to stand up for herself and put some sort of boundaries in place. Right. And that's whenever he was like, nope, time to go.
Right. For sure. What about the treatment of Gabby from Brian's mom? That was interesting. In the documentary, she talked about how I think things were okay at first when they first moved there, but then she picked up on this dynamic between Brian and his mom. It almost sounded like kind of a codependent relationship. His mom had a lot of jealousy of her. She would get upset and just stop talking to her or not make dinner for the night and do those types of things that are also very controlling and manipulative. So I was watching that and just thinking, well, it's no surprise that he turned out the way he did, because obviously the mom had some very unhealthy behaviors as well. So,
well, and it probably speaks to the way there's likely a family system that we don't know of. I mean, there was one text message that they shared where they were talking. I love that they have this information to just put on display for everyone, because one of the things that he said was, yeah, I'm embarrassed. I used to have to deal with that when I was a kid. Right. And so he probably saw a lot of that treatment from his father to his mother growing up, if I had to guess. There was probably some sort of toxicity there anyhow.
right.
I don't want to speculate, but if I had to guess, that would be my educated guess, is he saw these sort of behaviors between his parents, regardless of sex. He saw those behavior and exchanges, and the parents stayed and stuck it out, and that was just what he was used to. But it was very apparent in that message that he knew that there were issues. And he was basically like, yep, that was my childhood in a nutshell. Ha ha. Sorry that you have to witness this.
Yeah, for sure. Not surprising, but
right.
Yeah, disturbing still.
I have to say, if you're in a relationship and your significant other's parent or family member, whom it doesn't matter who, it typically is a parent. If they are jealous about the amount of time that you're spending with a person, that could be a red flag. I say that could be a red flag because as a mother, I would probably, if I saw one of my children surrendering themselves and if I see them letting go of friendships and blowing off, important relationships to spend and isolate themselves with one person, I may be concerned, right? But I'm not going to be angry about it, and I'm not going to be bitter towards their partner for it.
You're not going to feel slighted. You're going to just be coming from a place of concern.
Right.
But I think she felt slighted. She felt like something was being taken away from her.
Yep.
So
that's the difference in recognizing the red flags. Thanks, Susie.
For sure. Yeah. And Marina, thank you for your comment. Marina says, please call this coercive control, domestic abuse, and he planned the murder-suicide as he was very controlling. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think coercive control is a term that's coming to light more now, and can definitely, it is very appropriate for this situation. There was absolutely coercive control going on. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So those are some key moments that we picked up on. Again, not a comprehensive list, but some of those things that highlight specifically what covert abuse is, coercive control, those types of behaviors. So maybe we just talk a little bit now about why, I think we've touched on some of this, but why covert abuse is so hard to spot. Kind of touch on that for a few minutes.
Sure. I think in general, sorry, I'm trying to think of the words. I have the notes in front of me. I just, for this, I think that it is always gradual, right? There are always very small, subtle behaviors that trigger your nervous system. And so over time, what that does is it erodes our boundary lines. And it happens so slowly and so gradually that we don't notice it until we are pulled over on the side of the road with police officers asking us, about a domestic violence call.
Right.
And
Totally.
so that's part of the problem, is just not being able to recognize it because it's so subtle. I would also say that in coercive control, there's so much emotional and psychological, like there's manipulation that happens where we feel responsible as the victims. We feel responsible for protecting them. They somehow convince us that they are wounded in some way. And so we turn into the caregiver and the protector, where even if it is at our dispense, we protect them and we become responsible for their feelings and making them feel safe, because they somehow turn themselves into victims that we have to constantly rescue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's what I was trying to get out in the beginning.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense.
They are very great. Coercive controllers are great at making us feel responsible for ensuring that their moods are constantly stable, even though it's an impossible expectation, because they're constantly moving the goalpost.
Totally. Yeah. And I think I would just add that it's hard to spot because it's confusing. Because again, you're getting two different versions, maybe more, but most often two different versions of this person. And if they are more overt about it, it could be confusing to outsiders, but it's obviously super confusing to the victim because they're seeing the person in two different lights. And so it just makes you question your reality, makes you question the way you're feeling and second guess yourself. But that in and of itself, if you're feeling that confusion and questioning your own judgment, even though your gut's telling you it's not right, that's a red flag too. So all of those things make it really hard to identify.
I think it's really important to talk about the things, like, you could see it. She shared it in her message to her friend, and then her friend even shared some of this in her interview. One of the things that Gabby said a lot was, "I don't deserve him. He loves me so much. I don't deserve him." And I think a really big part of coercive control, they manipulate us into thinking, in that love bombing phase, right? They convince us that they love us on this entirely different level, almost
Right.
like that love bombing phase gives us all of those chemicals, and they create these addiction ties to the person. But they convince us that we are so lucky that we have somebody that cares and thinks about us so much.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I want to emphasize that a little bit too. If you're saying things like, if you are sad, if you're in a relationship that makes you cry a lot and makes you anxious all the time, and you constantly feel like, you're managing their emotions and their stability, and you're also saying things like, "I don't deserve this person," you may want to evaluate what kind of relationship you're in, because
Right.
you don't deserve that sort of treatment. I can tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's a really great segue into, what we wanted to talk about next, which is just how to recognize those signs of covert abuse in your own life. And what you just mentioned is such a good point. And that's just paying attention to how you feel. You might be feeling a lot of confusion, but if you overall are just feeling anxious, guilty, unsure around your partner, questioning yourself constantly, that's, again, like you said, that's just a sign to examine the relationship and really try to understand what's happening there. Another thing is just noticing these patterns of manipulation that we've talked about. The gaslighting. Are they twisting your words? Are they blaming you? Are they dismissive of your feelings? Those are all signs of manipulation and control. But just overall, we want to encourage you guys to, if you're in this situation, to really just trust your gut instincts, trust those inner feelings, because 99.9% of the time those feelings are right. So don't ignore, that little voice inside of you that's telling you something's not right. It can be helpful just to kind of, if you are feeling that confusion and question yourself, to write down these examples when they come up. So if something happens and it upsets you, and you know it's wrong, find a safe place to keep a journal and write these things down, because typically when things happen like that, we tend to, as time passes, we minimize. The abusers probably love bombing. So it, feels like things are going to get better this time. And over time, you just minimize those things that have happened. So I encourage everybody to write those things down. I think another thing is just that feeling of walking on eggshells. If you feel like you're constantly having to tiptoe around this person and, manage yourself, so to speak, it's a sign that you're not in an emotionally healthy relationship. So, yeah, anything you'd add to that? Just like other signs that people can look out for within themselves. We talked about the apologizing excessively, even though you feel like you've done nothing wrong.
Yeah, I think making excuses for their behavior is a big one too.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you catch yourself saying things like, he was just mad, she was just upset, well, they didn't learn how to express themselves. They came from a really bad upbringing and I feel so bad. They just don't know how to love. I know that he or she loves me in the way that they know how to love, but those are excuses. Mm-hmm. So if you find yourself making excuses for behavior that hurts you, that is another sign that you are in an abusive, covert abusive relationship.
Right. And the isolation's another thing. If you're being isolated from family and friends, all of those are signs that something's not right. So, again, the purpose of this episode is to help educate people on covert abuse, because for those who are in the relationship, just understanding that's obviously the first step towards breaking free and healing, and getting out of that situation. But what are some other ways that people can become empowered if they're in this situation to finally take those steps to leave? Do you have any tips for people out there listening?
Yeah. Recognizing that it's abuse and manipulation is the first step. If you know someone who may be in a relationship like that, maybe talking to them softly, or don't talk at them, but maybe ask them questions and say something like, hey, I saw something on YouTube the other day where someone was describing just that, and they said that's manipulation. That's not, you know what I mean? Like, you could just allude to, have you looked into the definitions of these terms? Because what you're describing sounds a whole lot like that term. If you know someone who could potentially be in that sort of situation. Right. So awareness is the first step. And then learning to set the boundaries for your own mental and physical safety. It's okay to prioritize yourself.
Absolutely.
And building a support system. I think whenever I watched that documentary, there were just so many people that there was one person that knew that her relationship was as toxic as it was, and it was her friend. But even her best friend, like she felt comfortable enough to break down and cry in front of her friend. But even her friend was saying, what's wrong? What happened? And she just wouldn't tell her. She
Right.
knew that it wasn't okay, but she never knew what happened in the fights. So there was something with Gabby where she just didn't feel like she could tell anyone what was happening. And it
Mhm.
breaks my heart. So
Yeah.
building a support system, know that your support system is a group of people that you can trust and that you
Mhm.
can talk to and tell, like, no matter if you're embarrassed or you aren't really sure what their reaction is going to be and whether or not they're going to judge you, you need a support system to help you
Some
get grounded and,
right.
like find that clarity that you need and ground yourself in truth,
Mhm.
so that you
Sometimes
can
that can be the
mitigate.
right. I think sometimes just reaching out if you're in this situation, just making contact with one person can be such a catalyst for change.
Yeah.
I know that was my own personal situation, and I think we hold off on telling people what's happening out of shame, out of embarrassment. Maybe you have it's a couple that you're friends with and you want to confide in the wife and you're worried you're going to ruin that relationship or whatever. There's so many reasons why we don't confide in people, but it can really be a great it can create some great forward momentum if you're wanting to take some steps towards leaving.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't
Or
even have to, what's that?
no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it doesn't even have to be a personal acquaintance. It can be a support group,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about our support group here at the end. But yeah, just finding people that understand, who get it, who you feel safe talking to is so, so important.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I was going to say, or you could just be like me and say, nah, I don't really want to tell any of the people I know. I'm going to hire a therapist.
yes, that's also a good option. Therapist or a coach like us who are
Yeah.
trauma informed and informed. It's so important. We have other episodes about this, that you find someone who understands this type of abuse, first and foremost, but that can be super helpful too for validation and just help figuring
Yeah.
out your plan. So yeah, support system is huge.
Yeah. And trusting your instincts is a big one. I know when we're in abuse, we are conditioned to not, we are conditioned to second guess our gut because we've been gaslit into, not trusting our gut and trusting our abuser. That rebuilding the trust within yourself and learning to listen to your instincts is a big one.
Absolutely.
And to build up the courage to find a plan to leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
think the most dangerous, that documentary tells us, if it tells us anything, it confirms the statistic and what they say, which is the most dangerous time for a victim of abuse is when they decide it's time to leave.
Yeah.
That is the most dangerous time. And that
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what happened with Gabby.
Yeah.
She was on her way out and
Mm-hmm.
she underestimated him, and he knew that he couldn't control her anymore and that she was not going to stay in that relationship, and he plotted
Yeah. Yeah.
everything that happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very
So
clear. And some of
safety
these
is
other
key.
things.
Stay
Yes.
safe.
Yes, for sure. Stay safe. Ooh, I think that kind of does does it for everything we wanted to talk about. It is such a heavy topic, but it's so important. And, I just hope we did her story justice. I think we did, and that her death was not for nothing, and that we can keep talking about these things to educate people and get out before something like that happens. So, just breaks my heart. But
Yeah.
any questions that have come in? I didn't see any. Saw a lot of great comments. So thanks everybody for listening and commenting along the way. If you're watching the replay of this, feel free to leave any questions or comments and, on the video, and we will circle back with answers to those. But maybe we just segue into a couple quick little reminders. We talked just now about the importance of building your support system. Heather and I do run an online Facebook community called Rise and Thrive Women. It is for women only, but we welcome you to join us there. We've got a link in the show notes to be able to join that group. We've got like 360 women in there. You can ask questions, get support from us. We have events we hold as well, monthly support groups. So check us out there. And then also if, Heather and I resonate with you, we have dropped in a link to our calendars to book a free 30-minute discovery call. If you'd like to explore what working with someone like us would look like, we can hop on a quick call. And then just a reminder to subscribe and like our videos, because we would love to have you join us again and stay in the know on future episodes that we're doing. So anything
What's
else
our next episode? Is our next episode, it's Grace, isn't it?
It is. I think, yes, Grace next week, and then we'll do an Ask Us Anything the week after that. So,
So be sure to subscribe if you guys want to stay in touch.
Yeah. All right. Anything else from your side before we close out today?
No, I don't see anything. So I'll go ahead and close this out. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of Rise and Thrive Women. We hope today's conversation has inspired you to take charge of your healing journey. Whether it's new perspective, renewed hope, or the courage to move forward, it is something worth celebrating.
And remember, your story is still unfolding. Your past does not define you. Within you lies strength, power, and limitless potential. So we encourage you to embrace it. Trust and follow your intuition with courage. Be bold, be brave, and always trust yourself. Until we meet again, take care, rise above, and thrive. You've got this.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.